Go.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Trust Annual Members Meeting for the year 2020-2021. Before I outline the plan for today, I would just like to say a few words of my own. Firstly, although it's sad that we cannot meet more of you in person, there are also many benefits realised from this format last year in our ability to reach many more people. I hope that it will be equally positive this year and that next year we will be able to combine both virtual and face-to-face. Secondly, as we think back to last year's meeting, I recall so vividly the emotional and passionate stories of colleagues who had given so much during the initial phases of the pandemic. Though we are formally reviewing the year ending April 2021, we will also recognise where we are today, and that continues to include the further incredible work which colleagues have undertaken in all areas of the Trust. I want to stress that although this usually focuses on the front line, and there should be nothing to take away from that, I want to acknowledge those who work in finance, securing funding, people in OD, recruiting and supporting staff, strategy and estates, ensuring we plan and attain structural and service improvements as soon as we can, Gloucestershire Managed Services, administration, and so many, many others. Without them, there just would not be a functioning front line. We continue to have what I believe to be one of the most effective executive leadership teams of any trust in the country, and that includes our outstanding Chief Executive, Deborah Lee. So to them and to all our colleagues, a huge thank you from me, the board, and if I may take the liberty, from all the people that we serve in Gloucestershire and beyond. Finally, some of you will know that I'll be stepping down as chair at the end of April next year, so this sadly will be my last annual members meeting. It has been the most incredibly rewarding and challenging experience of my professional life, and I would like to thank my non-executive and executive colleagues, the governors and everyone I work with here and in our local health system for all your incredible support to me. I would like to think I'll be leaving the Trust in a stronger position than when I started 5 years ago. So much has been achieved. But as I always say, the better you get, the more you can see to improve. So let me just take you briefly through the agenda for this evening's meeting. You can see the highlights there. We will have the annual review and quality accounts led by Deborah Lee, Chief Executive, and then a review of the finances by Karen Johnson, our Director of Finance. I'd like to introduce some new governors, and then we'll welcome Alan Thomas to talk about governors and the membership review. And then some really exciting stories, not that the previous bits won't be exciting, but very exciting stories about significant capital investment, our plans, and how some of that is already well underway. And then very importantly, at the end, we'll have half an hour or so for your public questions, followed by a piece of music, which has to be my very favourite piece of music from the last 2 years from The Music Works. More of that later. So if you do wish to ask any questions, then please type in Slido, as you can see there, capital S, Li, D-O, into your browser address bar and enter the event code #894027. Can't promise to take everybody's questions, but we'll do our best to answer as many as we can in the time that we have allowed. We do have some notes of the annual meeting from last year. They are on the website. They need to be formally approved. So as we did last year, if I can just ask if anybody has any thoughts on corrections or amendments, please let us have them within 7 days. Otherwise, we will take those as an accurate record from the meeting. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Deborah Lee, our Chief Executive, to take us through our annual report. Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for your kind words. I, for one, will miss Peter immensely when it's time for him to step down. They say that the chief executive and chair relationship is one of the most important in the trust. I'd absolutely concur with that and consider myself to be very privileged to have had the chance to forge that relationship with Peter. So a year on, gosh, is it really a year since I stood here and we talked about the challenges of the first wave of the pandemic. As Peter said, we heard some incredible personal reflections. I don't think for a moment any of us thought that would, with hindsight, be one of the easier parts of the last 18 months. And whilst it was very challenging, we were thinking on our feet, we were encountering things we'd never encountered before. We had a very singular focus, and that was to do our very best for patients with COVID. The last 12 months, however, have been very different. To that first surge, we have been continuing to care for patients with COVID, but also trying to return as much of our service to business as usual. And that has brought some immense challenges. My colleagues are, without doubt, tired, many of them even exhausted, and the challenges haven't stopped yet. I'm going to touch on that a little further when I go on, but I think if I reflect personally on the last year, what it's been characterised by, well, for me, just the continued privilege to lead the trust and to serve the people of Gloucestershire, and to be part of a team that led what I consider to have been a phenomenal response to the pandemic. Every day, I'm in awe of the skills, the compassion, the dedication of my colleagues. But as I've said, this has been a really challenging time, and many are even considering whether their future lies in the NHS, and that's a really difficult thing for us all to come to terms with. But it is the reality that we face. And whilst the last year has undoubtedly been characterised by tragedy, more people have lost their lives to the pandemic and to the consequences. Tonight I also want to reflect the fact that there's much to celebrate and much to be proud of. It sounds a clumsy term to say that Gloucestershire hospitals had a good pandemic, but I think in a relative context we did do really well. I think we served our community well, and I think we served each other well. And one of the things in particular that came to the fore was the way that we worked with our partners in the system. And if we hadn't had those relationships already established and continuing to build, then I don't think we could have worked the way that we did in the last year. So huge thanks to colleagues in other parts of the NHS in Gloucestershire. So what was our pandemic in respect of the last year? What are some of the facts and figures? Well, these are the figures for the year April 20 to March 21, and you can see there that we cared for 2,362 people with COVID in that year. Sadly, 177 of those people contracted COVID in our care, and that's a source of deep regret, something that we have learnt from, and we've done better with each phase of the pandemic that's passed, but certainly not something that we ever aspired to. In terms of the peaks in the year, well, as I said, we thought that the surge one that we had back in March 20 and through the spring was going to be the difficult time. But in fact, December 2020 is the month that stands out in my mind. We had, at any one point in time, 241 patients in our care with COVID. That compares to around 148 at the peak of the first wave. And 42 of those needed to be cared for in our critical care unit. And again, just to give you a sense of context, typically before the pandemic, we'd have been caring for about 18 patients in our critical care, so more than twice the number that we're used to caring for. In terms of who did we admit, well, men were slightly more likely to be admitted than women, as you can see from the statistics there. And more than half of those that were admitted were aged 70 or over. Patients from the most deprived areas of Gloucestershire were more likely to be admitted from other areas, but very positively for us, when we look at our outcomes, sadly, 20% of those that we cared for died. That's not unusual because the sickest patients came to hospital to be cared for, and sadly some of them to die with us. But that's better, considerably better than what was achieved nationally. If we look at the patients that we cared for in our critical care units, our outcomes were truly outstanding. The survival rate of 69% compared to 50% nationally. And the reason that's particularly outstanding is because for our model of care, many patients that would have been in critical care in other units, those that were perhaps less sick, they were being cared for in our respiratory high care unit. So if you made critical care in Gloucestershire, that's because you really were one of our poorliest patients. So to have more than 2/3 of those have a good outcome and go home is absolute testament to the excellence of the team that looked after those patients. So what are some of the other highlights from 2021? Well, one of the things that we said to ourselves at the outset was that we want to continue to make progress on as much as we can. We didn't want to be paralysed by the pandemic beyond what was absolutely unavoidable. We'd cast ourselves 10 strategic objectives the latter part of 2019, and these were things that really excited us as an organisation, and particularly I think as a board and a leadership team that had worked together to develop those. And we were really clear that we wanted to make as much progress as we could. And I think with hindsight, we'd probably reflect that we made more progress than many, many trusts around us and that we worked with during that pandemic year. We concluded our public consultation, known as Fit for the Future, which is all about helping us to realise and go on to deliver our centres of excellence, and we'll hear more about that this evening. The team was beavering away to submit proposals to try to secure funds that wouldn't otherwise been available to us, and more than £75 million of investment was attracted into the trust during that pandemic year. As I've said, money that was available nationally, it wasn't awarded to the trust. We had to bid, and we had to bid in some really competitive settings, but to the Cream team's credit, we drew in around £75 million of additional capital to invest in our sites, and we had a really successful couple of community open days back in September when we showcased some of the things that we'll be investing that money in, and again we're going to hear more about that this evening. Because of some of the decisions we took, they were quite bold decisions I think at the time around the model of care between Cheltenham General, between Gloucestershire Royal, some of the concerns about decisions we made in relation to Cheltenham General. Without a doubt, they served us well. Those decisions saved lives. As a result of some of those decisions, unpopular though they were with some people, we managed to do more elective surgery, more cancer care, more diagnostics than any other trust in the region. That wasn't only good for patients at the time, but it means that we're coming into this period of recovery with a better starting position than many, many other organisations. We delivered all 8 national cancer standards. I can't tell you what an achievement that is. The 62-day referral to treatment standard, so this is the measure of the time between a patient seeing their GP with concerns about a potential cancer to receiving their first treatment. We achieved that standard last year. That was the first time we'd done that since 2013. And better still, if you're a patient with, sadly, if you're a patient with lung cancer, better still, we were the top performer nationally. So the best performer in the country. There are about 150 hospital trusts, and we were the top performer in terms of waiting times for patients with lung cancer. And we know of all of the cancers, in terms of the staging and having good outcomes, lung cancer is the one where timeliness to treatment really, really matters and makes a difference to outcomes. Despite the challenges, I've talked about staff being fatigued. Some staff were indeed, I'd go as far as to say on occasions, feeling quite traumatised by the things that they witnessed and had to do. But despite that, and this is again testament to the loyalty that colleagues show to the organisation, but most importantly they show to each other, is despite those challenges, we had the lowest staff sickness rate of any trust in the South West. And indeed, we were asked to talk to the national team about some of the things we'd done to try and achieve that. And without a doubt, things like our 2020 hub, some of the programmes we put in place, TRIM, for example, our psychology link workers, were all part of a menu of things that we put around staff to help them cope with what has been, as I've said, a really challenging time for them. We started our big conversation, and you might question the timing of a number of these things when staff were so busy, but we know, we've heard it, haven't we? Culture eats strategy for breakfast, I think is the saying, but it really matters to me, to the board, to the leadership team, how people feel about their working lives. We spend a lot of time at work. And some groups of staff told us that they didn't always feel valued, included. They didn't always feel able to realise their potential. Some went as far as to say that they felt they were discriminated against because of their characteristics, whether that was their race, maybe they had a disability, perhaps they were from the LGBTQ+ community. And so we've spent a lot of time working to better understand what it is that leaves people feeling less valued, less included, and what can we do to make that different. And we developed and launched our Compassionate Leadership Programme, and that has evaluated so well with those that have done it. I address the programme every time it's run. I think we're on cohort 25 from memory, and everybody I speak to has valued that programme and has gone out to be a slightly different sort of leader. And we hope to roll that programme out further beyond our senior managers and senior leaders into something that I'm calling at the moment our Compassionate Colleague programme, because it matters as much what your colleagues feel about you, how they treat you, their behaviours, than it does their leaders. We've recruited over 1,600 staff. There are some stats there about who we've recruited. Of course, that's not all extra people because we've also lost staff. But net, overall, we've recruited an additional 600 staff, which is absolutely fantastic. Karen's going to talk about our financial position, so I won't steal her thunder other than to note it is a huge highlight that for the second year running we managed to deliver a balanced financial plan. Indeed, it was a small surplus. And of course, as we're doing tonight, being proud, celebrating what we've achieved is a really important part of being the sort of organisation we want to be. And our teams and individuals were shortlisted and indeed won more than 20 national or regional awards. And what I'm really proud of is that was both clinical and non-clinical teams. You know, our critical care team, as you might have expected based on what I've just said, won an award, but so did Karen's team, the Finance Team of the Year award for our South West region. So teams across the Trust thriving, excelling and being recognised for their excellence. We didn't stop focusing on our core business. We've said before that we want to be a research active trust. We aspire to be a university hospital. And during the last year, we recruited more patients from Gloucestershire into urgent COVID public health studies and trials than any other system in the clinical research network. That's not just good for our researchers and our research prowess, but that's phenomenal for patients. Patients that can get access to treatment and care that they wouldn't otherwise do if we weren't focused on being research active. And we were voted, I love to say this, the best of the best. We were voted the best undergraduate teaching academy by the students of our partner medical school in Bristol. And just 5 years ago, they were 26th out of 31 medical schools. They're now #1. So we were the best of the best, as I've said. And again, I can't underestimate the challenge because it has been a difficult year, but to be able to find the time to continue to educate and to teach and to ensure that students and learners of all walks of life in the Trust feel valued, feel supported and are able to learn is a really outstanding achievement. So what are some of the challenges going forward? Well, I think you've got a sense of those. Without doubt, our biggest challenge and opportunity is to support our staff to be the best that they can be. Our vision is best care for everyone. We've evolved that to talk about best care for each other. We know that if we don't look after ourselves, we don't look after each other, we won't be well placed to look after our patients. There is a legacy. The pandemic has cast a shadow, and that will be long and lasting, sadly. We need to restore services that we stood down, and we need to recover from the legacy of the pandemic, which is not just patients who've been waiting a long time. There are far too many of those, but also patients, you'll hear from my colleague Helen Mansfield from our emergency department, patients who might have presented many, many months ago if we hadn't been in the situation we've been in, who are now presenting with conditions that are more advanced, that are more acute, that are more difficult to treat. And we need to work with all of you to be open and be honest and to manage expectations about what the NHS can do and can deliver, and at what pace in the next year and beyond. The pandemic may have lasted for a year in anger, but as I've said, its legacy is going to take us much longer than that to recover from. And it never goes away. We need to move back towards our business as usual models in respect to the financial framework. We've had a little bit of what I might call a holiday period in respect of our finances. We've had extraordinary support from government in terms of the financial challenges that could have come out of COVID. We've had the resources that we needed to do the best that we could do. But rightly so, as a tax-funded system, we now need to move back to some of the more usual ways of working. So what are our priorities for the year ahead? Well, as I've said, they're going to map, aren't they, very closely to our challenges. So supporting staff to recover, to build individual and team resilience, because these challenges are with us for some time, and in particular to focus on retaining staff as much as recruiting staff. It takes time to recruit, to train, to develop, and what we don't want to do is to lose the really valuable and experienced staff that we've got. We need to work with our partners to ensure that the demand placed upon us from patients is managed in the best possible way. I was doing my post bag today and apologising to somebody that came to the emergency department with a condition that they'd had for 3 months that was niggling, and they decided it was time to get it sorted. That wasn't an emergency, and we tried to explain that. It's just one example of where that patient could probably have been much better treated as quickly in another setting, freeing up my colleagues in the emergency department to deal with those patients that only those can deal with. There's a lot of concern about primary care and the models of care that we've heard. I, for one, feel really, really disappointed in some of the narrative about our colleagues in primary care. They've never worked harder, they've never been busier. They have been open for business throughout this time. I've seen data that confirms that they're seeing around 20% more people than they saw before the pandemic. Yes, a large proportion of those people are being seen in different ways. I'm very grateful that I can talk to my GP on the phone at 7:30 in the morning now and not take half a day off work. But for others, it's important that they can access face-to-face care, and that's also in place in Gloucestershire, for which I'm really grateful. What we need to do is to work with our patients, with all of you, to communicate. What people tell us is that we understand what's happened, we're prepared to wait, but we want to understand what's going on. Where are we in the queue? How long might I wait? When will I hear? So we're working really hard to make sure that we communicate with our patients, with their families, in a way that we've never done before. Another thing that we've talked about, and this is a phrase that I've used before, potentially I may have overused before, but I think it's just such a poignant phrase, which is to note that we may have been in the same storm, but not everybody has been in the same boat. And that has shone a light on those that are at risk of, or indeed experiencing, health inequalities. Not everybody had the same experience of the pandemic. Again, fortunately in Gloucestershire, we've been able to look at our own data, our own outcomes, and we've been able to demonstrate that those from an ethnic minority, patients with a learning disability, for example, who fared less well generally when you look at national statistics, those groups of individuals didn't fare less well in Gloucestershire. In fact, they fared better than the national and the regional averages. But there are communities and there are individuals who are at greater risk as we move forward. And we need to work together to really understand where they are, to make sure that our services are accessible to them and that they're designed with them in a way that makes them attractive. We're developing our winter plan. For many of us, colleagues to the left in particular, it feels like we've been in winter for about 1.5 years now, and I know that many colleagues are anxious about what the winter will bring. But we're working together really well. We've got a robust plan. It reflects some unique challenges, without a doubt, but we are as best placed as I think anybody can be to go into the winter that's ahead. Social care is fragile. We know that. We hear about it every day. But our colleagues in Gloucestershire, in the local authority, in social care, are working with us. They're supportive and they're doing all they can to make sure that we've got a robust system of social care around us. The two are inextricably linked, and I'm really proud to be working in a system where we work together in that way. And then finally, we want to get on and implement the early phases of our Fit for the Future programme, because we want to realise the benefits for our patients as soon as possible and to begin to develop and grow our centres of excellence, as I've said, as we're going to hear about later. So coming to my final slide, we've spent a lot of time thinking about how we deliver personalised care, and Alan Thomas, my governor colleague, and other governors have been absolutely fantastic at continually shining a spotlight on those that start life with less advantage, that come into healthcare potentially at risk compared to those of us that are not vulnerable, that are able-bodied, who have good mental health, who don't use drugs. And working really hard to think about how do we deliver care that's sensitive to the different needs of different groups. I was delighted that this year we secured funding to appoint an individual to work in our emergency department who will bring skills, knowledge, expertise to work with people who use drugs. That's not something that everybody in an emergency department will be used to treating. people can come in crisis. It can be frightening for staff and for patients and their families. So a real focus in the year ahead on how we deliver care that's very sensitive and very specific to the different needs of people. If we get it right for these groups, my goodness, we'll get it right for everybody else. We're progressing our capital investment. I've talked about our programmes of investment in buildings, in equipment and in digital technology. I could spend the evening on digital technology. We have made such inroads. Just this afternoon I was privileged to be sat in the leadership team seeing some dashboards that have been created that will enable colleagues like Helen and others to understand what's going on in real time in their own department. It wasn't all bad in the pandemic. There were some silver linings that we've talked about. One of them, for example, many staff cite home working as a positive. Most people like a hybrid. They like to come into their office maybe once or twice a week, but they talk about how productive they are, how improved their well-being is, how much easier it is to navigate a work-life balance when they spend some of their time working at home. So making sure that we embed those silver linings. I've touched on our work around compassionate leadership and being a compassionate colleague, and that is going to be a huge focus for me as a leader, but as for the Trust more generally. And of course, just before the pandemic, we declared our climate emergency back in December 2019. And we have recently revitalised our commitment to becoming a carbon neutral trust by 2040. It's good timing, isn't it, to be talking about this with all that's going on in Glasgow. And we signed off our Green Plan in public at our Trust Board last Thursday, and that's a really, really exciting plan. We intend to achieve 80% of this goal by 2028, so more than a decade ahead of that final goal in 2040. So I hope I've left you with a sense of challenge, yes, but exciting times ahead. And it serves me to hand over to my colleague now, Karen Johnson, our Director of Finance, who's going to talk you through some of the financial details that I've alluded to. Karen.
Thank you, Deborah. Hello and good evening. So as Deborah's already mentioned, the 2020-21 financial year was probably one of the most challenging years that we've ever faced. And we entered the year with a very unknown position, and the financial regime was no exception to that. However, as a trust, we continued to do our normal rigorous process around budget setting. So as we entered the new year, we were really clear about what our expenditure levels were. And we were aiming to spend just shy of £600 million pre-pandemic. Clearly, the government obviously announced during the end of March that the financial regime was going to change quite radically. And as a consequence, they didn't want to see money as being a barrier to delivering great care for our patients and also protecting our staff during this pandemic. So we entered a financial year based on two halves. The first half that covered the months 1 to 6 was just a block payment, and that was made to trusts across the country, and anything that we spent over and above that was paid for as an additional top-up allocation. Now, we had to go through some rigour, of course, to make sure that our expenditure was legitimate, but this trust was on top of what that meant in terms of COVID expenditure. So you can see there that we actually spent, as the impact of COVID, we actually spent just shy of £35 million. The second part of the year was more around planning for elective recovery. We wasn't assuming a second surge in COVID, so the second part of the year did see our expenditure ramp up quite significantly. Unfortunately, as Deborah's already alluded to, clearly we hit the second surge. During December and January was very challenging for the Trust. And as a result, we were unable to deliver the level of elective recovery that we planned for, which did result in a surplus, as Deborah's already mentioned, towards the end of the year. It's weird, isn't it? You make a financial benefit because you don't treat patients. It doesn't seem like it's a bit of a perverse incentive in a way from a financial perspective. But that's where we ended the year. Deloitte's our new external auditors came in, reviewed our position, and we got an unqualified opinion, which is, again, a fantastic achievement for the Trust. So this slide just really outlines for us where we spend our money, and I just wanted to pull out a few areas here. So you can see that our pay bill equates to just over 60% of our overall expenditure. We've also, we're currently in a position where we are in active dialogue with HMRC around the payment of our VAT on our supply and services of our theatres. And because that dialogue is still ongoing, we needed to make a provision that if we lost that case, we would have to potentially pay back a level of VAT provision. And as you can see there, that was to the tune of £15 million, so quite material. And then the final thing on this slide really was just to draw the attention of that we did receive top-up from the national teams to the tune of £35 million. And that was direct expenditure relating to COVID spend. And that covered all sorts of things around storage of our personal protective equipment, staff cover where staff were unfortunately on sick, additional staff in terms of our infection prevention control measures we had to put in place, as well as internal transport from from Cheltenham to Gloucester. That was additional costs as well. And finally, we put quite a lot of investment into our health and well-being of our staff, because it was deemed absolutely a critical part that we supported our staff during this time. So we talk about revenue a lot, and capital sometimes doesn't quite get the same level of airspace. So it's been nice to hear Deborah talking about the capital investment. I've worked in the NHS now for 12 years and have never had the privilege to work in an organisation where we absolutely apply for every bit of money, capital money we can get. And 9 times out of 10 we are successful in our bid application. And you can see there that we invested over £40 million worth of capital spend last financial year. And to put that into context, our capital plan is to the tune of 24 million. So you can see there £17 million worth of additional funding we managed to get into the Gloucester system through quite a rigorous bidding process. And that funding covered all sorts of areas. It covered some of our critical infrastructure. It covered IT. It covered some environmental projects that we were able to escalate and move at pace, critical care support, and a lot of COVID support as well. So a fantastic achievement. And we were able to spend the majority of that 40 million in year. And if we hadn't have done, we would have had to have given that back. So it's a fantastic achievement for the Trust. And I guess looking ahead to the current year, so the current year has been based on a block payment again. For the first 6 months, we've had to live within a financial envelope. As Deborah's already mentioned, efficiencies are coming back in, and you would expect that as taxpayers. So as we enter into what they call H2, which is half 2 of the financial year, so months 7 to 12, we are currently working with our system partners to create a balanced plan into the latter part of the year, working really closely with operational colleagues to ensure that we have a winter plan that's credible and deliverable. We know that's going to be a challenge, but we're ready for it. As we enter 22-23, my feel is it's going to be another uncertain year. What I would like to see is it will be a 12-month plan rather than 2 lots of 6 months. But what we are going to have to do is get our expenditure back down to pre-COVID levels, which is going to be a challenge, whilst reducing our waiting lists. And we will need to work as a system, not just the acute, to be able to deliver that. Thank you very much, and I'll just hand over to Peter.
Thank you very much, Karen. and indeed terrific achievement when we think back over the years of some of the less satisfactory years that we've had. So thank you to you and the team. This is my opportunity to both congratulate and welcome 3 new governors. I have not yet had the pleasure of meeting all 3 of you, but hope to do so very soon. Starting at the right of the screen, welcome to Keith Lewis, who joins Anne Davis in the Cotswold district. Welcome to Andrea Holder, who joins Jeff Cave in Tewkesbury. Welcome to Mike Ellis, who joins Alan Thomas in Cheltenham. We continue to be well served with Liz and Graham in Gloucester, Debbie and Pat in Stroud, and Hilary in the Forest of Dean, where we have a vacancy. So if anybody is interested at all in joining this great bunch of people who do some fantastic and really, really valuable work, then please do get in touch, as we will be going out to election later this year. Not to mention, of course, at the bottom of the screen, Nick Price, who's our out-of-county representative. And then completing the cohort of governors, we have 5 staff governors, of which we have 4 currently in place. Again, very well served with Russell, Sarah, Julia and Caroline, and a vacancy in our allied health professional group. Again, that will be up for election later this year. And as you can see, all 4 of our stakeholder governors are in place. Again, really well served with Matt, Colin, Maggie and Pat. So I have to say thank you again to all the governors, and welcome to new governors. And talking of governors, I'd like now to hand over to Alan Thomas, our lead governor.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for that last welcome you'll give me. We'll come back to you in a minute. I tried to come in here incognito today, again in a suit and tie. A couple of people didn't recognise me, but it's a once-in-a-year opportunity to put the tie on. I am entering my 9th year as a governor of this trust, the 8th year as a lead governor. This will be my last year as it's coming to, and I'm determined that we'll finish on a high. Thank you to Peter for welcoming our new governors. I've managed to speak to all 3, but of course I've met one, I haven't met the other 2. I'd like to thank Tim Callaghan, who was the governor for Cheltenham along with me. Thank for his service over the last 3 years. And to Fiona Marchant, who was the allied health professional staff governor, who has moved on to another part of the country. We look forward to attracting interest in the forest for our vacancy in that public governor slot, and we'll do what we can to make that role as interesting as possible to those of you in the forest. So in terms of what I'm going to talk about, it's the same sort of thing. What did we do over the last year, or didn't do? And what do we hope to do in the coming year? So in terms of what we did, I think the most important thing to stress is that we continue to do our job. We have statutory functions which we managed to continue thanks to the good offices of the Trust. It was all, of course, done virtually in the year we're talking about. We did not meet each other, but we managed to continue to engage successfully with the Trust in all its aspects. We have a great relationship with the board, both executive and non-executive, and a particularly good relationship with the chair, Peter, and the chief exec, Deborah. And I'd just like to say what we continue to do was be open and transparent with each other. And I don't think in the terms of a pandemic, that's an easy thing to achieve. And so I'm really grateful to all my colleagues and to the Trust for the way we've managed that. I believe we've improved slightly the mechanics of communication outwards to you. We do have now some newsletters which we can write personally, and we have attracted inward communication based on that. We've enabled easier communication to us, but I don't think necessarily we've advertised that as well as we could have. So I think there have been some improvements. I think those of you who've heard me over the last few years talk about communication with you and getting feedback from you, it is one of the areas we still find difficult, and the last 12 months have been no exception. The fact we couldn't visit the hospital, we couldn't visit other places where we might meet you has made things more difficult, but I'm hopeful that the next 12 months will improve things. So what haven't we done? Well, I've sort of referred to it already. We haven't met face to face. There are still a couple of governors I've not seen. For information, tomorrow we will have our Council of Governors, and the first time for a good 19 months we'll be meeting face to face, and that's a thing to look forward to. And I think, I hope my colleagues are looking forward to seeing whether we've grown at all over the last 12 months or so. We haven't been able to visit in the hospital. We haven't been able to, and those visits are really important to us in the sense of understanding what the staff in this trust are having to do, having to put up with, in a sense. And it makes it easier for us to understand this if we can visit. And again, I'm pleased to say that in the next month we are reintroducing that visiting opportunity. I don't believe, as I've said, we've advertised sufficiently who we are, what we do, and how you can get in touch with us. And I'm really hopeful that we can improve what we've started to improve in this last 12 months. In terms of membership, strangely, I have to report a significant drop in membership over the last 12 months, but deliberately so, in the sense we have, through our corporate governance team, engaged with our old membership to find out how active people wanted to be in the role of a member of the trust. And inevitably that reduces the number. Some people are happy to be passive members of the trust, maybe receive information, others wish to be more active. So we have reduced our membership, and to that extent it was a little disappointing to see the numbers of people who actually voted in the recent elections. I'd hope that the next elections we may attract a greater number to vote. The Trust website, we're hoping to make our presence felt a little bit more in that and what the benefits of membership can be. And again, look out for that sort of information in the newsletters. More importantly then, what do we hope to do over the next 12 months? Well, like Deborah's referred to a couple of things in her speech. We have an agenda of things that we are interested in collectively, and we certainly wish to continue with that agenda. We wish to continue to press for an increased diversity, certainly in our own body. We are not a diverse body, and we're looking to improve processes to encourage others who are more diverse than we are to become members of our governing body. That's an agenda that will not go away over the next 12 months, nor will our approach to health inequalities. We will continue to agitate as governors for improvement in the way, and Deborah referred to this, in those who are less fortunate than we are, particularly. I have a particular interest in mental health, as do some of my colleagues, and there's learning disabilities, the deprivation in some parts of the county. We are really encouraged by what the Trust is doing in this area, and we want to continue to push for that agenda to be right at the top of what people think. We also, may not be thanked for mentioning this, we also will be looking at the development of the integrated care system over the next 12 months. There are huge benefits, potentially, to having a statutorily based integrated care system in this county. It's a simple county in relation to many other parts of the country, so it shouldn't be too difficult to do. And we've been impressed by, over the last 12 months, the way the various elements of the county have come together to deal with the pandemic, for example. What we're less sure about is how well the developments in the ICS, if I can call it that, are being communicated to the public as a whole. Do you understand what the ICS can do for you? And that's going to be part of our agenda of the next 12 months. How is it going to benefit you? Because that's what you're directly going to be interested in. And to that end, unlike this trust and our colleague trust GCS, there are no accountable governors, publicly elected governors, in the new ICS. So it will become more difficult for us to directly influence how these things happen as the ICS is put into a statutory basis next April. We will do it through Deborah and Peter here in this trust, and that is also a serious agenda item for us over the next 12 months. We'll be looking to, we welcome the relaxation of visiting, which is going to happen in the trust, and we look forward to visiting it ourselves. So I want to finish though by thanking, on behalf of my colleagues, collectively and personally, for what the trust has done for everybody in the county over the past 12 months. I personally, unfortunately, saw for myself how COVID patients are dealt with in the trust a couple of months ago, had a spell in hospital, and also saw how my fellow patients were treated. And I couldn't have asked for better care. And I'm sure that's the case for everybody who has been in the trust care over the last 12 months. We see how people are tired, but it doesn't make any difference to what they do for us. So thank you. And thank you to Peter, Chair of the Trust, who won't be here this time next year. I've worked well with him, I think, despite the fact we support very different football teams. And thank you, I think that's about it for me. Next year, who knows what I'll come dressed as. Over to Simon, who's going to talk about future developments.
Future, thank you, Alan.
Thanks.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Really excited to talk about the next section. This is where we get the chance to just give you a bit more detail on the 101 million investment programme that we're delivering over the next 2 years. And some of you may have seen that on local press coverage we did, and you may have received one of our leaflets through your door giving some of that, but we wanted to help bring it to life a bit for you. So first of all, a bit of context. So you will be familiar with our strategic objectives. So the 10 objectives we set ourselves back in 2019. So by 2024, these are the things we want to achieve. And it's been said here this evening, we've already made some fantastic progress against this, despite managing through a pandemic. And that's been possible through the 8 enabling strategies that we have. So you'll see things in there around clinical strategy and quality strategy, digital, research, people and OD. And having these strategies really clearly defined and being able to demonstrate progress, that's what helps us when we make applications for external capital and for grants. And again, as you heard, 75%, so over 75 million of the 101 million that we're talking about this evening has come through that external application process. And part of that, one of the key areas is around our clinical strategy. So we talked to you about this over the last couple of years. So we did some engagement in the summer, and then we completed our consultation process. So our Fit for the Future programme. So this is where we talked to you about how we wanted to use our 2 sites for at least the next 10 years. And this is about that Centre of Excellence strategy, with Gloucestershire Royal having a greater focus on emergency care and paediatrics, and Cheltenham General having a greater focus on planned care and oncology. And again, having this clarity of where services will be in the next 10 years means that we can make these investment decisions, so we make sure the right estate, the right infrastructure, the right equipment is on the right site. So at Cheltenham General, over £36 million invested over the next 2 years. You'll see there 2 new theatres and a new day surgery unit. Combined, that enables us to treat an additional 3,000 patients a year. Significant investment in digital and in carbon reduction. So again, linking back to our green plan. In carbon reduction, a really good example of that is around our solar panel programme. So installing 7 solar panel areas across the trust will reduce our carbon footprint by 25 tonnes a year. The equivalent of 113 homes, and an annual saving of £25,000. On top of that, it's improvements in how we heat and how we insulate our buildings. Our image guide interventional spoke, so you'll hear later in the evening from Connor, who will help bring that to life for you. And then again, around our radiotherapy programme. At Gloucestershire Royal, over £64 million invested. This is about, again, significant investment in our carbon reduction, in our theatre stock and in our digital programme. And there's two pre-recorded videos that we'll play, one from Mark Vipron, which will explain what we mean by a surgical robot, and again by Connor Alleman, who will bring the image-guided interventional surgery programme to life. But first of all, I'm going to hand over to Helen Mansfield, who's going to talk about our emergency care programme, particularly in how the estate side right-sizes that for the demand we see coming through.
Thank you, Simon. My name is Dr. Helen Mansfield. I'm an emergency department consultant at Cheltenham and at Gloucester, and I'm one of the clinical leads for the department. I represent our 80 doctors and clinicians, our 150 nurses, the receptionists, the porters, the administrative and the domiciliary staff who are our emergency department team. And hope that I can share with you what our emergency department services provides, what our journey has been through COVID, the challenges we've faced and the steps we've taken to overcome them, and what we're looking towards for our future emergency services for you. So we have two emergency departments, one at Cheltenham and one at Gloucester Hospital. They're both open 24/7. Ambulances take patients to Gloucester Royal 24 hours a day, and they take ambulances to Cheltenham General between 8 AM and 8 PM. After 8 PM at Cheltenham General, our nurse practitioners provide urgent care services for our patients who walk in. And we treat everyone. We treat babies. We treat our oldest members of society. And those older people are becoming increasingly frail with more and more complex long-term conditions. Since the pandemic, we've had to put in place COVID infection control pathways, and they're here to stay. Urgent care is an illness or injury that needs to be assessed and dealt with on the same day, but it's not life or limb-threatening. Pharmacists, GPs, dentists, minor injury units are all options to help you with your urgent care needs. And if you're uncertain, then speaking to NHS 111 is the right thing to do. Emergency care is when you have a life or limb-threatening illness or injury which requires immediate and intensive treatment, and that's what our emergency departments provide. So let me take you through the way our services have changed during COVID and where we are now. Before COVID, we had two open emergency departments. And on the top row here, you'll see changes that affected our Gloucester Royal site. Gloucester Hospital continued to take all emergency department patients and provided COVID secure pathways for all our patients. We describe red patients as those with or at high risk of having COVID, and everyone else was amber. Back at the beginning of COVID, we didn't have the same testing strategies as we have now, and so everyone was regarded as a COVID risk. To deal with that, we increased the floor print of our emergency department in Gloucester. We relocated the minor injury unit to the outpatient area, and we collaborated with our paediatric colleagues to take children attending with illness direct to our children's unit. Cheltenham became a minor injury and illness service, and this was really integral to our hospital's strategy for maintaining cancer services and elective care options on the Cheltenham site, but also ensuring access to the best care options for patients with COVID on the Gloucester site. And as you've heard, Deborah's spoken of the success in that strategy. As we've passed out of COVID restrictions, the opportunity to have COVID secure pathways at Cheltenham has become a reality again, and we were able to reopen the emergency department at Cheltenham in June of this year. We were welcome to take back our assessment of ill children to the emergency department at Gloucester in September of this year. And again, that was a collaborative approach as our children's unit prepared for increasing in other respiratory illnesses for children, and indeed we've seen that bear through as a steep incline in demands on our children's services. We've evolved how we provide emergency care services, so traditionally it all would have been through the emergency department itself. And now we have a number of alternative same-day emergency care centres that can provide you the support that you need for your emergency care needs, but aren't within the main emergency department. So around us are our ambulatory medical investigation areas, our Gloucestershire Priority Assessment Unit, our acute medical unit, surgical assessment unit, to mention a few that take the bulk of our patients. And reaching into our emergency departments, we have specialist services such as specialist stroke services, specialist frailty services, mental health services in reaching to both of our departments. I saw some of the most impressive examples of collaborative working, of pulling together, of public appreciation during this span of my career, and that's created some really poignant memories for us. And as we all in Gloucestershire find our new normal, sadly we're facing some of our toughest challenges in emergency services now. Across emergency services, this is felt nationally, and locally I continue to be really proud of our team who continue to deliver as we ask more of them, keep changing, keep innovating, keep improving so that we can continue to provide the best services that we can for you. So what do we have now? Well, we have 2 open emergency departments. As I said, Cheltenham Emergency Department reopened on June the 9th, and after 8 p.m, it's a nurse-led service. On the Cheltenham site, we have specialist cardiology angiography services. They're particularly important for patients who've had a sudden heart attack, and they're currently available 7 days a week, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m, and we're looking forward to that service becoming 24/7 at the beginning of next year. We also have specialist emergency urology services at Cheltenham and specialist oncology services, with mental health services in reaching to our service there. And then we're supported by other same-day emergency care centres on site and a co-located GP in the evenings and at weekends for your urgent care needs. At Gloucester, which is our larger unit where we see about 3/4 of our attendances, we receive ambulances 24/7. It's our designated trauma unit, our designated stroke unit. We have on-site emergency general surgery, orthopaedics, paediatrics, gynecology, amongst others. And so ambulances convey our most gravely ill and injured patients to the Gloucester site. As I said, we have other specialist services such as mental health and frailty reaching in to provide care within our emergency department, and a number of same-day emergency care services around us. On the 30th of March this year, the CQC, the Care Quality Commission, came on an unannounced visit. They commented on how honest and open and engaged our staff were with their inspection, and they had a number of positive findings that we can rightly be proud of. They found us to be caring and kind to our patients, professional and calm even under extreme pressure, and this is the place that I recognise that I work. They also observed a number of things that were not consistent with good care. Our overcrowded department meant patients received care in corridors with delays to treatment. Care in corridors is awful for patients, and it's awful for staff who strive to give good care in an environment that they just can't. They found our service required improvements, and our department welcomes their findings as a lever for change that has now eradicated corridor care. By increasing the footprint of the emergency department and reconfiguring our acute medical areas and consistent collaborative work with our acute medical colleagues, we've managed to eradicate care in our corridors. And there's been a cultural change that I feel throughout the Trust, and that won't come back. As well as expansion of our daily nursing numbers, we've had success in recruiting new members of staff, and in just the 3 months, here's some examples that you can see are there on the slide, both medical and nursing staff that we've recruited. And we're looking at collaborative ways to entice in members of staff that are difficult to find across the nation, so collaborating with our paediatric team to try and recruit trained paediatric nurses. For our patients arriving by ambulances, we've embedded some new processes that allow senior clinicians to see and assess our patients arriving by ambulance very rapidly. And between March, when the CQC came to visit, and June this year, we managed to reduce the time to be seen for that group from 60 to 20 minutes. We've also allowed and created some different access points for paramedics to take patients directly to some of our same-day emergency care services. And as if we weren't busy enough, we've managed to introduce a new electronic patient record during this time. So we've gone from a paper-based to a paperless system. So the team who've implemented this have worked tirelessly to help us reduce time taken for documentation, to improve the processes that we use for requesting tests for patients. And this is paving the way for transitions in other areas of the hospital to implement this also, and is another example of how our trust is really investing in sustainability. We've engaged patients, and they have helped us redesign our environment. So we really prioritise improvements in care for patients with mental health problems. And those patients helped us redesign our mental health areas with appropriate furniture, soothing artworks, and they've helped change the processes to allow them a more confidential way to raise their distress and anxieties to reception staff. And as well as providing ongoing clinical service, we've managed to maintain our medical education. So we've maintained training sessions, we've maintained educational supervision, and we've maintained our emergency departments as a place that emergency medicine trainees want to come to. They choose to come to us for their training. Other success is the contribution, as we've said, to how we've managed to maintain our cancer and elective care services in Gloucestershire, and the excellent COVID care that we've managed to give our patients that we in the emergency department have given the first care step to. So the challenges that we face next are national challenges, and it's difficult to take control of them. They give us increased pressures in our service every day. The rising population, the rising frailty, the rising complexity of the patients that we see. I'm sure that you'll probably all know someone who's had mental health challenges in their life, particularly during the pandemic. And sadly, that's manifesting as more patients in mental health crises coming to the emergency department for support. Waiting longer for your elective care means that your condition deteriorates. And we're trying to look for innovative ways to ensure that we have the appropriate staff to provide our services, even in the face of national staff shortages and fatigue. The ambience in the emergency department at times has really changed. So in the space of the pandemic, we've gone from clap for carers and that real vibrancy of public appreciation to increasing rates of violence and aggression. We really can see the different factors that make it difficult for patients in our environment. They're ill, they're worried, they're distressed, they may have a long wait to be seen, but there isn't an excuse for abuse and aggression towards our staff. So we're working at different ways that we can ensure safety for our staff and improve their experience. Demand on our service continues to rise. It's been rising persistently throughout my career as I've been here for a decade as a consultant. In the last 5 years, we've seen a 19% increase. What that means is on our busiest day this year so far, we had 500 patients, just over 500 patients come through our emergency departments within 24 hours. So what are we doing to try and ensure that we can continue to improve and continue to provide good emergency care for you in Gloucestershire? Well, there's lots we're doing, and the 31 million investment's really going to help. So we've got £31 million to invest in buildings. We're going to significantly extend the emergency department on the Gloucester site, and that'll help us provide new patient pathways, and we're already working on ensuring we have the right staffing in place to get the best out of that new build. We're going to pretty much double the size of our acute medical initial assessment area, so one of our same-day emergency care areas, and we're going to significantly increase the size of our acute medical assessment unit ward. And alongside that, a new additional ward with 24 more beds is really going to help the flow of patients through our emergency department. So we're really committed to continue to provide and continue to improve our emergency services in the emergency department. Our doors are always open, they never close, and behind those doors we're working really hard to ensure that we can provide you with emergency services that you need. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Conor Alleman. I'm an interventional radiology consultant in the Gloucestershire Hospitals NHS Trust. I'm going to be talking to you about image-guided interventions and surgery. So we're going to be exploring these 5 questions. What is image-guided surgery? Why do our patients need it? Who provides the service? How is that service currently functioning? And where will the planned investments take us in the future? So what is image-guided surgery? There is an escalation of interventions we can give to patients. We can observe them and give them advice. We can give them medications, and we can perform surgery. Each step has an increased amount of invasiveness and risk associated with it. Image-guided surgery is a treatment option which is relatively new and sits somewhere between medicine and surgery. Conventional surgery requires a surgeon to make an incision in the body and open it so that they can directly visualize the diseased organs and tissues underneath. In contrast, image-guided surgery utilizes modern imaging techniques such as ultrasound, X-ray, and CT to look inside the body for us. Using this image guidance, we can gain access to any point of the body accurately and safely through a pinhole incision. Through this pinhole access, we can perform a variety of procedures. They can be life or limb saving, or they could just be run-of-the-mill planned care. They typically fall into 4 categories, and I'd like to give you an example of each of those categories so you get a flavour of the kind of work that we do. So, open. A patient may present to the emergency department with a heart attack. They would get transferred to an image-guided surgeon who would place a needle into their radial artery and pass a wire and a tube up and into the heart. Using imaging, they would identify the blockage causing that heart attack and then proceed to open it up with a balloon or a stent, potentially saving that patient's life. Close. A patient may also present to the emergency department with a ruptured aorta, so that's where they have a leak of the main blood vessel in their body. This is obviously a life-threatening situation, and that patient might find themselves in front of me, where I will put pinhole access into their groins and take a wire up into the aorta and reconstruct it from the inside out, closing the hole that's causing the life-threatening bleeding. We also take tissue samples using image guidance, and this is incredibly useful in patients with cancer. The samples that we take get sent off to the laboratory and help diagnose what type of cancer the patient has and the best treatments for it. So, destroying tissue. We have started to perform ablative treatments where we place specialized needles into patients via the skin directly into tumors. And these needles will either freeze or burn the cancer cells, destroying the tumor and curing effectively the cancer. So why do our patients need this type of service? It's less invasive than surgery and can usually be performed without general anaesthetic. Therefore, there's reduced complications and a shorter recovery time. Because of a reduced risk profile, we can offer treatments to patients that previously would have had no other option. Currently, some patients have to go out of the county to receive emergency interventional surgery. We want to be able to provide that locally so that we can provide best care to everyone in the county. So who provides the service currently? Image-guided surgery is provided by interventional radiologists like myself, cardiologists, and vascular surgeons. we tend to work in separated silos across the two different sites, although we do share some support staff and equipment. So how are we currently functioning? So 3 years ago, this was the landscape of interventional surgery in Cheltenham and Gloucester. The interventional cardiologists and vascular surgeons were based in Cheltenham, while the interventional radiologists were based across both sites. If we think about emergency care, the majority of our patients were coming through the Gloucester emergency department. And therefore, anyone that had a heart attack coming through Gloucester had to be transferred across county to receive their time-critical treatment. So this wasn't an ideal setup. So in 2018, a group convened to propose changes to the service. They decided that by joining cardiology, vascular surgery and interventional radiology, we could form a centre of excellence for complex and emergency care. This would also free up space on the Cheltenham site for an image-guided interventional surgery spoke, which would bolster the centre of excellence for planned care. So how are we looking today? All three specialities have taken steps to improving their services. Interventional radiology currently offer a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week on-call service. We've also brought in new treatments such as uterine fibroid embolization and renal cancer cryoablation. We've also had discussions and have signed contracts with University Hospital Birmingham to repatriate some of the complex liver cancer patients so that they can receive their treatments locally. During the pandemic, the vascular surgeons moved from Cheltenham to Gloucester, and there's been improved access to inpatient treatments. The interventional cardiologists have recruited new consultants and are providing an emergency service from 8 in the morning to 8 in the evening, 7 days a week. However, they remain sited on the Cheltenham site in mobile labs. So we've got one more leap to get to our vision. So this is where the planned investments will take us. The funding will afford us to build the IGIS hub in the Gloucester Hospital and the IGIS spoke in the Cheltenham Hospital, concentrating on emergency care in Gloucester and outstanding planned care in Cheltenham. So what's this going to look like in reality? So the hub in Gloucester, we will increase the cardiac lab capacity from 2 to 3. The interventional radiology labs will increase from 1 to 2. And there will be a new hybrid vascular theatre built on the same site. We'll now be able to concentrate our specialist skills and our staff and our equipment into one physical space, which will improve the efficiency and also the outcomes for our patients. In Cheltenham, we are building 3 new CT scanners with increased outpatient capacity, increasing the capacity for biopsy lists by having a new interventional radiology room built and a new interventional ultrasound room built. This spoke is going to be able to support the outstanding services provided by urology and oncology on this site. And it's going to provide us a space to introduce new treatments that are only available in teaching hospitals elsewhere. So the future is really bright. We've had lots of interest from new consultants looking for jobs. The backbone of the funding is in place, and there is a clear vision that is going to come to fruition. It's exciting to be bringing traditionally teaching hospital services to Gloucester, and I know that myself and my team completely relish this opportunity to provide outstanding care to everybody. Thank you for listening. I'd like to introduce Mr. Mark Vipond, who is going to talk about robotic surgery.
Thank you for inviting me to present the robotic surgery programme for Gloucestershire hospitals. My name's Mark Vipond, and together with Simon Higgs and Steve Hornby, we've introduced this programme this year. The background is that whilst Gloucester already is a robotic surgery centre, it's primarily been used in urological and gynaecological surgery, and for gastrointestinal surgery, there hasn't really been a huge uptake nationally. Yet, we're a very important centre. We're a 3 counties esophagogastric centre, which is a regional centre for the management of complex esophageal and gastric cancer. We're the busiest gallbladder unit in the southwest, and we're a tier 1 weight loss surgery centre. For colorectal cancer, we're the 3rd busiest in England, and we're the 3rd busiest emergency surgery trust in England, with excellent outcomes. This is the Versius robot made by Cambridge Medical Robotics that we've acquired. You'll see on the left of the picture is the surgeon console, and in the middle of the picture, modular robotic arms, which are controlled by the surgeon to do the surgery. The big advantage of this is that there is 3D vision, there's no tremor, particularly important if you're a surgeon, much more precision and articulation of instruments so you can reach hard to reach places and perform more complex surgery in a keyhole manner. The aim is to improve our patient outcomes with this next generation robotic surgery. Obviously, we want to provide an excellent surgical service that's truly fit for the future, and we will become a centre of excellence as a multi-platform robotic surgery centre. And we obviously need to implement this in a safe, stepwise manner. We've introduced it now in upper GI surgery, and we're the first upper GI unit in the UK to use the robot. Colorectal surgery started this month, and we plan transoral ENT surgery for next year. As I said, implementation safely is really important. We have a team approach, and you can see there Simon Higgs, the surgeon, and his theatre nurse team with one of the modular robotic arms. The case selection, patient selection is very careful. They're all consented that they're having robotic surgery. It's been implemented for the first time in the UK. We debrief after every case, all the data's collected, and we follow all the patients up and collate our data and learn. So the milestones of this, we first were looking to implement this just before the pandemic, and we're in negotiations with Cambridge Medical Robotics. Our partnership really began once we'd signed a contract. The Versius robot was delivered at the end of March. We did simulation training with it. Then we went to Cambridge and had 3 days of further training with our theatre nurses and team, so they're all used to how to set this together and all the safety aspects. And our first gallbladder case was done in early June. A month later, a press release showing what we'd done and reporting it widely. And so far, we've actually now done 24 cases in upper GI surgery, and last week, the first colon cases were performed. This was us in the news. For Cambridge Medical Robotics, it was big as we were the first upper GI unit. We've been on ITV, we've been on the BBC, and we're due to present our implementation process and results at the Association of Laparoscopic Surgeons in December. So the cases we've performed in the upper GI team, there's now been 11 gallbladder operations, 8 complex diaphragmatic operations where we're high up in the chest. We've done laparoscopic hernia repairs. We've done 2 stomach removals. And today, we've done our first esophageal case. So where do we go next? Well, we're going to increase our experience with doing complex esophageal and gastric cancer surgery. The colorectal team are going to be doing more and more colorectal cancer cases. ENT will roll out next year with their transoral surgery, but they will be the first unit in Europe to be using this Versius robot. It has really galvanised our nursing teams, and they're now becoming first assistants in the robotic surgery, and we're looking to have a robotic nursing fellow. So this is a multidisciplinary approach. We've got a research programme, collaborative research with CMR, and research fellows being appointed. Thank you very much for listening to this. This was our team as they went through their first training programme. Myself on the right, Simon Higgs on the left, with our theatre nursing staff and all the staff from CMR who have been so supportive in our programme. Thank you.
So a big thank you to Helen, Connor and Mark for sharing with us some of the terrific work that's going on in their areas. You'll see with me, Alan has joined me and Deborah's joined me, and I'm also very pleased that Professor Mark Pietroni has joined me. He's Director for Safety and Medical Director and Deputy Chief Executive Officer. So we've got a number of questions coming in on Slido, so if you bear with me while I just sort through some of those, and then we will seek to answer them. The first one that springs to mind is one about ambulances, and the question is, how is the Trust minimising delays turning around ambulances at the door of ED? What measures are being put in place, brackets if necessary, to improve the situation?
You're looking at me, but of course I'm going to look at Mark, because one of the things that Mark does is every Friday he'll be found in the emergency department on our acute medical wards managing this very situation. So Mark, do you want to talk a bit about what you've been doing?
Yes, thank you, and thanks for the question. It's obviously very important and also very pertinent at the moment, as we've all seen in the press, that around the country hospitals are struggling with ambulances and ambulance handovers at the moment. So what are we doing? We're doing lots of things. Starting by trying to avoid the A&E department if it's not necessary. So 2 weekends ago I was on call and I was taking calls from GPs and from paramedics in ambulances and enabling them to bring the patients directly to one of our ambulatory care units, as you heard from Dr. Mansfield, or to our Gloucestershire Priority Admissions Unit. And those patients bypass the A&E department completely. They get seen quickly and appropriately by the relevant specialist, and they're therefore not in the A&E queue. And our surgical colleagues, I'm a medic, and our orthopaedic colleagues are doing very similar things too. So that's one of the things that we're doing. In terms of the A&E department itself, we significantly increased the footprint, the size of the A&E department, the number of cubicles that we have within the A&E department and the staff to look after those. So obviously that enables us to get more people into the department in a safe way. We have a new rapid enhanced triage service at the front door. So anybody who comes in off an ambulance is seen either by a consultant or one of our senior registrars, and they move very quickly through that pit stop area, we call it. The really sick patients are identified and can be treated immediately. But the majority of patients who require investigations, whether that's scans or blood tests, can have those done. So they're done immediately, so that by the time a doctor gets to see them, those results are already there, and that can speed things along. There are times where we get lots of ambulances in a very short period of time. We can have 15 to 20 ambulances in an hour, and with the best will in the world, it can be hard to get all those patients in and through quickly. And so one of the things that we have also done is create what we call a cohort area. So that means that the ambulance crews are able to move those patients to an area inside the department where they're looked after usually by an ambulance crew. There's a partnership we have with the ambulance service, and that enables, they can look after 4 or 5 patients in that area, and one ambulance crew, so that enables 3 more ambulances to get back on the road. Because we're acutely conscious that any ambulance that's queuing outside one of the A&E departments isn't on the road going to a patient that needs help. So those are some of the things that we are doing, and you've heard about the plans that we have in train to further increase the size of our emergency department in Gloucester, and we invested significant monies in the Cheltenham Emergency Department actually just before the pandemic to increase the size and efficacy of that area. So those are just some of the things that we are doing. It is a difficult period, as Dr. Mansfield said, and I wouldn't want anyone to think that there aren't times when it feels like a struggle, but by and large our staff cope extremely well with these most difficult times. And what we always make sure is that wherever people are in the queue, we know who's there, we know who the sick patients are, and we make sure that those people that need to be seen immediately are seen immediately.
Thanks, Mark. Changing subjects, it looks like quite a few people have been interested with the talk about our capital expenditure. We've got quite a few questions in that area. I'll pick one out to start off with, which is the announcement of the investment into building projects in the Trust is great, brackets, and long overdue. Agreed. When will patients start to see the benefit from this?
Yeah, great question. And already, so we're already seeing the benefits. We've got a whole range of programmes that are ongoing. For example, I've been working in an office for the last month or so where we've been doing solar panelling to our roofs as part of our carbon reduction investments. You'll have seen, if you've been on site recently, some buildings going up close to our emergency department near the front door of the tower block. So as early as November, we'll have some expanded services there. The major development, so this is the investment of about £45 million at Cheltenham and Gloucestershire Royal. Gloucestershire Royal to expand and develop our A&E department, as you've heard, and at Cheltenham to develop our theatres. That's autumn 2023, which when I started saying that a few years ago felt a long time in the future, but actually is not so far away. So, so very soon, yeah, very soon, and some of them, as I've said, already happening.
And there's a linked question, I guess, similar. Can you explain what plans are there Fit for the Future team, or the Fit for the Future team doing to secure a new hospital site within the county boundary? Yeah,
this is a really popular topic, isn't it? We get asked about this a lot. So what can we say? Well, firstly, the 2050 plan for Gloucestershire has a place marker for a new hospital in it. So there is that ambition. I think it's fair to call it a vision and ambition as opposed to a plan, but there is a vision, there is an ambition to develop a single hospital, or indeed to develop on a single site. That might include retaining some of the services we've got. It might be a brand new build. All of that is open for debate. But what we do know is that the government's investment programme in new hospitals is committed right out until 2030. So if we do get a new hospital in the county, it won't be for at least a decade and probably longer by the time we've submitted plans and got approvals and all of that. So I think that speaks to why it's important that we continue to draw in investment now, we continue to develop our services, but it's certainly something that's being talked about. It is an ambition, and time will tell as to whether it becomes a reality.
Thank you, Deb. I'm going to move on to another question. Alan, you might like to add into this one. To improve wider community involvement with the Trust, are there plans to reconsider having an agile approach to being a governor? So not exactly sure what agile approach means, but if I can just put a sort of context on what I think it might mean, is that we are very well aware, are we not, that actually, despite the great work the governors are doing, there are sections of the community that are underrepresented in terms of protected characteristics of a number of dimensions, not least age and ethnicity, but others as well. And I think we've had recent discussions, haven't we, about how we might seek to address that in different ways. But you might like to comment on that.
I think, I mean, I actually quite like the use of the word agile. I think for a lot of the time, the governing body here is static in the sense we work in the Trust rather than out of the Trust. I mean, some of us are able to communicate with neighbours, friends, etc., and hear things on the street, as it were. And if the word agile means doing more of that, then clearly that's been difficult in the last 18 months. And before that time, we were beginning to look at measures that might enhance it by us appearing at other events, things like Health Watch events, which were also curtailed during the pandemic. And clearly it's an aim. But I think I have to respect the fact that people become governors for different reasons. And we have, although we are of a similar diversity, shall I say, We are very different people, and some people feel more confident about going out and about and talking. So I think there's an element of training involved as well to make us more agile. And, we look to the Trust to help us with that.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting how we've both taken a different view of the word agile. I was thinking about the Council of Governors and its representation, but that's probably more what the question was asking. But hopefully we've covered that.
When we talk about agile working, we're talking about colleagues working at home, we're talking about virtual, digital, so all things to all people.
Good, thank you for that question. Another one here. How is the Trust performing tackling the backlog of treatments reported this week? How are patients prioritised?
Well, I'll talk about the first bit, and then Mark, perhaps you can talk to the second point. So as I said, if you were listening in when I was giving my reflections on the year, we had a positive picture during the pandemic in that our 2 sites enabled us to be agile and to continue to operate on patients at Cheltenham when perhaps we wouldn't otherwise have been able to do. We kept patients safe. We could continue to offer imaging and scans, and we did very well compared to many trusts. What that means is we've come into this phase with fewer patients waiting. I wouldn't want to mislead. We have got around 750 patients who are waiting for care who've waited more than a year. When we came into the pandemic, that was 6 patients, so a deteriorating position. But trusts of comparable sizes around us have got many thousands of patients waiting. So we're doing well. That number's come down by around 200 just in the last 3 months. So not only are we trying to turn the tap off, we're emptying the bath as well, which is a positive place. But Mark, what's really important, you touched on it when you were speaking earlier about making sure we know where everybody is, what their needs are, and that we prioritise appropriately. So do you want to say a bit about how your clinical colleagues do that?
So it's really important to just recognise that because of the decisions that we made during COVID, in particular, our patients with cancer have received better treatment and more timely treatment than almost any other part of the country, and that continues. In the depths of COVID, we were doing little else other than cancer, and the sort of place in the queue didn't matter. We clinically prioritised. So consultants and other clinicians were going through the lists and making sure that the most urgent people got treated. Fortunately, we've moved on from that now. Our elective and our diagnostic capacity is pretty much at pre-COVID levels. And so we continue to prioritise on the basis of clinical need. There's a national prioritisation system that goes P1 to P5, and our clinicians prioritise patients, and it's not a once and then you're forgotten about. You get a place P1, P2, but it's a dynamic process by which people are prioritised and reprioritised. And as capacity has increased, we're increasingly looking at not just clinical urgency around cancer, but we're including things in particular such as morbidity and psychiatric distress that's associated with some really quite distressing conditions which might not be life-threatening, such as pain or a number of other conditions where just living with that condition is really very difficult. And so that's taken into account in our prioritisation process. And more recently, we have focused in particular on making sure that absolutely nobody waits more than 2 years. We know everybody on our list who's anywhere near that time frame, and they are being called in. And as Deb has said, we're performing well comparatively on patients who've been waiting more than a year. And unusually, I think, it's the case that both our diagnostic waiting lists and our more than 1 year waiting lists are coming down, whereas in a number of other trusts they're going up. And finally, just as a sort of final note, we have a process called harm review. So we look at our waiting lists, and again, our clinicians, our consultants and other senior clinicians look to spot any patients who are at risk of coming to harm from their waits, and anybody who has felt that might have come to harm from their wait, to make sure that that doesn't happen again, and that we do bring forward anybody in that situation. So there's a lot of work going into making sure that people are called when they need to, that's not just about cancer anymore, that's also about a lot of, for example, our orthopaedic patients. We're very conscious that that is as important. but also that it's a dynamic process. So it doesn't happen once when your GP refers you in. We continue to review those lists. And our ops colleagues in particular are making sure that nobody falls through the net. So I wouldn't like to say that we're perfect. Obviously, we're not. We face the same struggles as other trusts of long waiting lists. But we're very, very conscious of that. And individual clinicians and individual specialties are working really hard to bring their waiting lists down. It's really encouraging to see how committed they are to doing that and how focused they are on making the best use of all the outpatient time, of all the theatre time that we have. And in particular, our radiology and diagnostic colleagues who are bringing down those lists at the moment is really impressive work. So yes, there's lots to do. And it is of no comfort to you if you're waiting a long time for your operation to know that we're doing better than other parts of the country. But we will do all that we can to bring those lists down as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, I was just saying, and that might mean also that people are invited for an appointment in the evening, Saturdays, Sundays, which isn't necessarily what's been usual. And again, just to acknowledge that colleagues who are working hard, who've had a tough year or so, just hugely grateful that they're also prepared then to perhaps use downtime, study time to also deliver services out of the usual working day. So, yeah, a really impressive response from the teams.
Yeah, I just want to support what Deborah and Mark have said. I mean, clearly, as governors, we believe you. We've seen the efforts that have been made to reduce the waiting list. It matters to you rather than what happened elsewhere in the country. So what's important to us as governors is how that waiting list and where you are on it in some ways is communicated to patients. And I think patients generally, appreciate what the problems are as long as they know where they are. And I think I just want to stress the communication piece, which I know is well documented now.
I was going to ask exactly that question, actually. How do I know where I am on the list, and how safe should I feel, and how am I being communicated with? We talk about a lot at board, so I think it would be useful just to get a comment here, maybe.
I have to respond to that. So we've done a couple of sort of mass communications where we've written out to everybody on our waiting list just to note that we've got them, to explain what we're doing. The challenge that we have got is how do you land the plane on the postage stamp, is that we know how many people we've got waiting, 756 today. What we don't know yet when we look forward, in part because of winter, is how many theatre slots will we have over winter, how many beds will we have available to us. So saying that you'll be operated on in March 2022, if it turns out to be the summer of 2022, that's difficult. So what we are able to say to somebody is, what's their priority? So we can say that, to explain that system that Mark talked about, priority one is a patient who's come in probably by ambulance through the emergency department and they need surgery now, and they'll always be done now. Priority two is typically your cancer patient. Priority three is somebody that needs to be treated soon. So ideally 3 to 6 months. Without that treatment, they might have poorer outcomes, they might deteriorate. And then we've got the vast majority who are category 4 routine patients who will be seen largely in priority order in terms of how long they've waited. Not always, because the numbers in P4, as we call it, there's quite a range in there. But we are able to tell you, and again, with a number of ways on our website that explain how a patient can contact our booking service and find out what their priority is. We won't be able to say the date that they're going to be treated unless they're imminently planned to be treated. We tend to book out our clinics about 6 weeks ahead. We want to give people time to organise their lives. Operations, sometimes shorter notice than that, maybe a month, in extremis 2 weeks. But patients often tell us, put me on your cancellation list, I'll come down on the morning if you ring me up. So we keep those lists as well.
Great, thank you very much for that.
Sorry, Peter,
yes, Mark.
I promise not to sing. I think the other thing that I would say is that we work incredibly hard not to cancel people at short notice, because there's nothing more frustrating or annoying to people to have a date than have it cancelled. Now, it isn't always possible, but that is one of the things that we do take very, very seriously. and work incredibly hard to make sure that doesn't happen. If that has happened to you, I would like to apologise. But again, our rates of last-minute cancellations are amongst the best in the region, and I don't think we've ever cancelled anybody twice, which is happening sadly in other parts of the country. So, once you get your date, we do our very, very best to make sure that happens.
Thank you. Next question. Are there any plans to increase the amount of care delivered to patients in the community itself, in local centres or in their own homes? A lot going on there. Where to start with that?
Well, I can start with just a couple of examples, because I've been in conversations this week, and actually tomorrow I'm going across to the Aspen Centre. So if you know the geography of Gloucestershire, you might know that there's a fantastic practice, purpose-built, near to the hospital. And we were talking with our colleagues in dermatology services about what is it about their service that requires them to be on an acute hospital site? And it's quite a short conversation, because they said very little, very little. And they were working in an environment that wasn't ideal, wasn't suited to modern dermatology care. And so that service is now being delivered off the hospital site. We've got a whole floor in the Aspen Centre that we secured some of that external funding for. It's been kitted out with a view to delivering dermatology services. So I'm really excited to be going to have a look around there. Just this morning I was talking to colleagues in partner organisations about the new hospital planned for the Forest of Dean, and talking about the services that we can put out there. So we hope to be able to deliver a range of services, including endoscopy services. But I think to come back to the point about people, we talk a lot about beds, don't we? I know that we've got 896 in the hospital, we've got 198 in our community hospitals, but of course we've got around 300,000 beds in Gloucestershire in people's homes. So increasingly developing services that enable people, rather than to go on to care in a bedded setting, or even worse, what you might feel is an institutional setting, enabling people to go home, and then us reaching in to those homes to support their care. And that might be support from social care, because they need help with just their daily routine of eating and dressing and washing. But we've got a new service we're developing where somebody who would have stayed in hospital, so they could have had antibiotics administered several times a day via a drip, they can now go home, and a community nursing service will visit them in their home, deliver those antibiotics through a drip that's in their, the back of their hand or in their arm or wherever, and be at home when they might have been in hospital for perhaps a week. And there are very few people that tell us that they'd like to stay in hospital. The vast majority, want to go home. They sleep better, they're less anxious, and the evidence is they tend to recover more quickly. Yeah, great success during COVID with our COVID virtual ward. I mean, Mark, do you want to touch on that? Because that was a real success.
So, yes, and there are lots of different ways of approaching this question. So starting with the virtual ward. So during COVID, one of the things we did was have patients step down from the hospital, and also general practitioners were able to step patients up into what we called the COVID virtual ward. And this was people who were at home with a pulse oximeter, so they could measure their oxygen levels. And they got a daily phone call from a senior clinician, usually a GP, to make sure that they were okay, and they could be sent back into hospital if they were not doing so well. And it's one of the reasons why the hospitals in Gloucestershire did so well during COVID, was that a large number of patients, several hundred at one point, were being looked after in the community, and they weren't in hospital. And of course the phone call from the senior clinician, from the GP, is reassuring to the patient, and also to hospital clinicians who might otherwise have kept people in hospital for a day or two longer, and also for GPs who might otherwise have sent patients into hospital. So it was a win-win. So on the back of that, we're looking at other things that we can do with that model, and colleagues in the respiratory clinical program group in particular are looking at that and how that might be expanded this winter. Some of the other things that we're doing, we've talked a lot about just now about recovery of waiting lists. So, for example, we're doing a lot of trauma surgery in Cirencester Hospital, so trying to make the best use of our community hospitals and their theatre capacity to help recover, or in that case do trauma, but that also then allows us to do other operations in the trust. We've got a big plan for expansion of community diagnostics. So we're hoping to be able to do more things like CT scans as well as endoscopy in the community hospitals. And a number of our clinical program groups, which are groups that work across community, primary and secondary care, are looking at the future of service delivery, which is increasingly shared in those different areas, and no longer the Trust does hospital and the community provider does community and GPs do primary care. We work together to provide the best care for the patient, where the patient needs the care, whoever that needs to be delivered by. And we focus less on bringing the patient to us to deliver the care in the way that's most convenient to us. And that, of course, is part of the integrated care system approach, which goes live in the country from the 1st of April next year.
And one thing, Peter, that I'd reflect, because it would be great, I appreciate it would be great to have everything everywhere, but one of the real successes of what we've done in recent times, I think, is recognising that rather than have something on a hospital site because we need to just do it once because it perhaps needs specialist staff or specialist resources, is that we've done some really great work with our partners in Gloucestershire Health and Care Foundation Trust to develop services that are not in every community, they're not every locality, they might be just in one place. So, for example, our stroke services that we've developed in the community, the Vale Hospital, they're real, exemplar services. And whilst, yes, people do have to travel to that part of the county because it's a county-wide service. The quality of the environment that they receive their care in, the nature of the service, just the environment in terms of its suitability to recovery, the location, the gardens, these aren't things that we can ever replicate on an acute hospital site. So it's just opening our minds to the opportunity and the potential for delivering services throughout the whole of Gloucestershire. There's such a lot of opportunity. I think we're really fortunate in that respect.
That's a good example, isn't it, of the fact that there are two trusts, but actually we treat individuals as individuals as much as we possibly can and work together ever closer, I think, in a number of ways. And you talked about the mental illness one, and I think that's a really important
area. And again, the COVID award, that worked because colleagues in primary care, GPs were willing to look after patients that were in those settings. So I really feel that we're bringing that model of integrated care that many parts of the country are just getting to. Actually, they're talking about what they're going to do from next April. We've been working on this for a couple of years, and I think there's some really exciting things going to come to fruition in the next year too.
Building further. Probably one last question. There's a number around this theme, so I'll just ask one of them, and then we'll have a couple of comments, and then probably draw to a close, I think. Has anything, and you've touched on this already a little bit, has anything beneficial come from the coronavirus experience that the Trust would like to retain going forward?
Well, yes, so I wish I could click my laptop here, because we've got what we try to do during the pandemic. They talk about sort of the mother of invention being necessity, and as we were inventing and innovating during the pandemic, we started to capture that. We started to document it, write it down, and we did some work with staff to say, what would you like us to hang on to, and what are the things that we might want to let go of. This won't come as a surprise. Colleagues said, hang on to free parking and the subsidy in the cafeteria, and actually we fought really hard to keep those things at play, and we have still got free parking, but on a more serious note, some of that stuff I talked about around agile working. So around half of our follow-up outpatient appointments we now deliver through digital means, and that may not be a sophisticated video conference, it might be a telephone call. Patients typically, and colleagues and clinicians tell us that first consultation works really well face-to-face, but once you've met, you've got a plan. Much of that oversight that goes on can go on through a phone call. Alan, we've talked about this, but other governors and patients have told us that the fact they don't have to drive, to park, to pay for their parking, to feel anxious about whether they're going to be late, how long they might be in clinic. People really value the opportunity for that kind of digital care. It doesn't work for everything. People need the laying on of hands, people need to look at an abdomen, but again, just to give you an example, that dermatology example, about 20% fewer people now come to that new service I talked about because their GPs have got a special camera, they can take a picture of a lesion or a rash, they can send that using digital technology, and one of our very specialist nurses or our consultants can look at that and say, fine, we don't need to see you, or let's see you quite quickly. So really embracing the digital aspects of the learning that came out of COVID. There were many, I could go on, but I think really important that we don't lose sight of the fact that there was some very positive stuff. I mean, Alan, you talk to us from a patient perspective.
No, I mean, I think you've just said that, Deborah. I think it is true from the patient. You know, there are times when, why do you need to go into hospital? You know, you can do it on the end of a phone or a video or whatever. But I'd extend that to the workings of, you know, of governors in general in terms of, I mean, during the pandemic, you know, I mentioned in what I said, we haven't met, but we still managed to do our job. Not 100% because we can't physically see things, but and in fact I think I've got some colleagues who are a little anxious now about returning to the problems of travelling and parking, and particularly if they're not close to Gloucester or Cheltenham. Of course, we've got governors in the Forest and the Cotswolds, etc., who are now going to have to travel. So I think that, you know, the mixture of digital and face-to-face is here to stay.
That's the sweet spot, isn't it? Getting the hybrid where you can choose to come into the room or you can listen in or contribute from afar.
I think that, you know, from the clinical space and the working space, I think it's going to be important.
And just to build on that, to remind us that in terms of governance, we maintained nearly all of our board committee meetings. We made them a little bit more efficient, narrowed the papers down, etc. But we kept going when many trusts actually sort of just said, no, we're not going to do it at all. And in fact, our future now, as we know, is we'll try and have our board meetings face to face, with public being able to either view or attend as soon as we can get bigger spaces. But our board committees will maintain virtual, and that stops people travelling around and ensures that we can get people popping into the meeting for a short period of time. So I think that's a really powerful way of harnessing the good and going back to some of the good from pre-COVID.
I was on a ward yesterday, actually. You've just reminded me. And it was a great example of. I was talking to a patient who I went over actually because they looked a bit tearful. But actually, the reason they were tearful was because they'd just put their phone down. They'd come off the phone, FaceTiming their grandson, and of course, prior to this whole digital revolution that happened, so they were delighted to get visits from their son or daughter who lived close by, but they wouldn't have had that engagement with their grandson because he was away at university, he was in Scotland, and he said he rarely saw him, whereas now, family quizzes, FaceTiming, but here he was in hospital with the help of a healthcare assistant actually, on his phone, talking to his grandson. He said it was as if he was in the room, you know, so those are the sort of things that I hope that we will continue to embrace and just make easier and easier for people. I think I'm loving my Saturday night quizzes.
It feels like we could carry on chatting all evening, but I just need to
shout out to other things.
So
we innovated due to COVID, and we developed a particular model of respiratory high care. Pre-COVID, we had, I think, 4 beds. We can now deliver that across a whole ward. And that will be available for people with all sorts of respiratory conditions. And that was shortlisted in the recent BMJ, British Medical Journal Awards. But more importantly... Highly commended, indeed. But the collaborative working between our ITU staff, our respiratory staff, our A&E staff, and some of our acute medics, and the way in which they responded rapidly to the acute needs of deteriorating patients, and what we call a merit team, won that award for innovation. And there are any number of services that innovated during COVID, and that will stay with us. But these two are national exemplars and have won awards or been highly commended as a result. And the learning and the benefit from that will stay with us forever.
Yeah, good example.
Great, thank you very much. So thank you very much, everybody, for your questions. I've just got a couple of comments which I feel duty-bound to read out. First of all, this one: thank you, Alan, for your excellent and extensive work as lead governor. Big shoes to fill. P.S. Your mother would be proud to see the tie out again. Modesty almost forbids me from reading this one out, which is saying, just wanted to say, well done and thank you to everyone involved in the annual members meeting tonight. You've done a great job pulling this together. Well, actually, the people that have pulled it together you can't see because they're behind the scenes. But thank you very much to people in Sims corporate governance team, all the comms team, the tech guys behind it. You have indeed done a fabulous job. So just before we finish, thank you again, everybody, for your attention, joining us this evening, for the many questions that we've had. Sorry we weren't able to answer them all, but I hope we've been able to give a flavour of the answer to them. And just as we go to close then, Deborah, I wonder if you could introduce our final piece of activity for the evening, which, as I hinted at before, one of my favourite pieces of music from the last 2 years. Please tell us about that.
And this was something that we only lighted upon quite recently. It was our community open days, wasn't it, back in September? And there is a fantastic organisation in Gloucestershire. It's known as the Music Works. And their mission is to transform the lives of young people through music. And my goodness, we saw some fantastic examples of that. This was really brought to life during the pandemic, when many young people found themselves often feeling housebound, not in touch with their usual social networks, and many of them discovered music for the first time. And this piece of work, this music that we're going to hear this evening, was developed because anybody that Music Works was in touch with was invited to submit a little clip of their interpretation of this piece of music. And through some very clever people, I want to name check Ben O'Sullivan, who was with us on our open days. They then spent time cutting that and editing that to produce this piece of music. I hope I'm going to get the name right, because Every Rainbow Drawn, is that right? Every Rainbow Drawn. And it is a bunch of young people's reflections on the pandemic, on lockdown, and what that period of time meant for them. But I think it's simply beautiful. So please join me in enjoying this music tonight.
Thank you.
Waving through a window, eclipse blown through the pane. A cloud of storm has come along to rain on our parade. Every call when you're on call, in the dreams before you leave. On your shoulders now is every breath we breathe. Every rainbow drawn. Every color colored in. It's a history. Here's to not giving. Everything you do, everything we play, okay, until this goes away, until this is done. Through every mask, through every veil, there's a hidden on the heart, a story to tell. Every step you're taking, gonna help us make it. I'm an angel without wings, with the strength to carry on. Every rainbow, every color. It's a history. Here's to not giving. Everything you do, everything we play, okay, until this goes away, until this is done. Without armor, and it must be so hard away from home. For everything you sacrifice, but we know there's a blinding light when together comes and takes away alone. When together comes and takes away alone. When together comes and takes away alone.